Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
I had the pleasure of moderating a roundtable workshop among 14 highly accomplished B2B CMOs who had been brought together by the CMO Club. Now, the purpose of this discussion was to identify and address some of the key issues that CMOs were wrestling with. And one of the big issues that came up a lot was demand generation and how much revenue could or should marketing be expected to generate? So we went around the room and said, well, so what about you? How many? One person said, 5%, marketing's responsible for 5%. Another person said 10%. And then someone in the room said, well, marketing generates 80% of the sales. And so there was like this moment of silence and all the heads shifted and looked in one direction. That CMO that everybody started looking at was Eric Eden. And I'm delighted to report that Eric is my guest today. And we're going to spend some time breaking down the technology and the processes you need to turn marketing into a revenue engine. Now, before I introduce Eric, let me tell you a little bit about him. I met him several years back. He was the CMO at Cvent, the event management software company. And I was struck at the time at his mastery of the MarTech universe. By the way, if you've read my book, you'll also recognize Eric from the third chapter in which we discuss the role of research and what it can do to help not just learn about your customers, but give them useful information back that becomes marketing, as I like to say, marketing that is a service. So anyway, in addition to Cvent, Eric has been a marketing leader at 2 other companies that have gone public. So that makes 3 companies he's been the CMO at or a marketing leader that went public. It stops being an accident at that point. The other 2 were Network Solutions and Vario. Eric is currently the CMO of Receipt Bank, which is not a bank, but instead is a global provider of business finance apps used by over 100,000 small businesses and 5,000 accounting firms. Headquartered in the UK, Receipt Bank raised 50 million. You could say they banked 50 million in Series B funding in 2017. So there's a lot of energy and big momentum behind this company. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Drew. Really appreciate it. Excited to talk about these topics of demand generation and MarTech today. I'm very passionate about these areas.
Well, in truth, I've met a lot of CMOs, as you know, and I don't know many who know more about this than you do. So we're going to take advantage of your expertise, treat this show like a tutorial of sorts on how to turn marketing into a revenue engine. So let's start at the beginning of this process. Maybe when you started at Receipt Bank or earlier at Cvent. What are the first steps? How do you lay the foundation for marketing to become a revenue engine?
Well, I think I've been very fortunate because I joined technology companies about 20 years ago, right when the dot-com boom hit. And a lot of this marketing technology started to be created and be used across companies. So Salesforce was the first one. And then 5 or 6 years later, a lot of the marketing automation companies started. And then it just kept building from there. And so I've been fortunate over the last 20 years to kind of grow up in marketing during that period. And a lot of what I've learned over that last 20 years is through trial and error. But what I think the biggest lesson that I learned is that, without, a lot of people would say that, they have problems with their CRM system, or, they have problems with tracking things. But really, I think what I've learned is that if you don't have a good marketing technology stack that enables your demand generation engine, everything falls apart. And I think that happens in a couple of ways. First of all, you and your own team can't even measure or manage what's working and what's not working. The second thing is that you lose alignment with your sales team, who's your internal customer, and you lose credibility with the other people on the management team, the other executives, the CFO, the CEO, and what that leads to is that you don't get the budget.
Yes.
So pretty much everything falls apart if you don't do it correctly. And so there's a lot at stake, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of the things that you mentioned. And one of the things that I hope is that your trial and error experience will then be inform the folks so that maybe they'll try and make different errors, but not the same ones that you made along the way. And so you made a couple of important points. One being, obviously, if you don't have this in place, you can't measure it, and therefore you can't get budget for it. So let's talk about this. And there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg here, but let's talk about the basic rudiments of a marketing technology stack. When you say, because I mean, I can't build a stack of 7, things right away. I have to get the budget for it. And in order to get the budget, I have to show that it's going to get a return. So where do we start here?
I think the first key is understanding how executives and investors, people who are funding the marketing, are thinking about it these days. And I think that things have shifted in the last, let's call it 10 to 15 years, in that there's a common understanding now that marketing should be evidence-based. It shouldn't be just a matter of opinion. They really expect that everything can be tracked. I mean, they can do just about anything with apps on their mobile phone. So they just don't believe that you can't track, marketing's effectiveness. It just doesn't compute. People just assume that you can provide evidence, fingerprints on the weapon, that you caused that to happen. And so the burden of proof is on the marketer. So once you start to understand that, and just come to grips with that, you can't go to meetings and say, well, it's complicated. I just really can't prove it to you, but just trust me. Overall our sales are going up, so it must be going well. Like, it just doesn't, that used to work 20 years ago, but it just doesn't work today. People won't allocate budget if you can't give that evidence. So once you understand that, then you can start to say, okay, well, I have to figure it out. And you have to have like phases. So short term, if you have to track things in Excel spreadsheets while you're putting the systems in place, then you have to figure out how to do that. And then you can build to midterm solutions. And, living the dream, as I like to say, could be years out, but people don't want to wait years. So you have to come up with effective, short to midterm strategies that allow you to build that confidence that you have the mindset of evidence-based marketing.
So we're going to talk about it. So evidence-based marketing, it's a great notion. Let's talk about that specifically, because you and I know that not everything can be attributed at 100%, and that there are all sorts of interactions that could happen that could affect particularly a pipeline sale that might be 12 to 18 months. So it's hard to pinpoint these things. So do you just focus on the direct marketing, which I mean, like, I know if I buy search and I get a click and I can keep going with that, I could eventually get to a sale. I mean, do you just focus on your direct marketing first because those are the things that are easiest to measure?
Well, I think one of the tips that I would say is that I think that the marketing leaders should take a leadership role in defining how things are being measured and offering up a way that others can buy into of how it should be measured. So depending on your business, that might vary a little bit, but basically figuring out how you can frame things up in such a way to make people comfortable that results are being generated from dollars being spent. So a lot of organizations have adopted the demand waterfall from Sirius Decisions over the last, let's say, 10 years. And they talk about MQLs, marketing qualified leads, SALs, sales accepted leads, SQL, sales qualified leads. And then they create a diagnostic method of defining each of those. What does that mean of how marketing hands leads to sales? What each stage means, and how you can determine where things are going wrong. Is it that people aren't showing up for sales presentations, or is it that they get presented the solution and they decide not to buy because of one of many reasons? Those are different problems. And so the key really is coming up with a model that works in your company, within your industry, that you can agree with the other executives, primarily the head of sales, to this is how we're going to manage it. And it's a way that you can have a common language and avoid misperceptions. Like, I always see a sales guy in the elevator and I say, how's it going? He looks at me and says, the leads are crappy. What does that mean? Does it mean the bad contact information, or they didn't sign the contract with you, or something in between? And so not having that common language really causes that breakdown. So it's a real opportunity for marketing executives to help define that, because a lot of times people don't know how to tell you to define it. But if you service up a way to them that says, look, this is how I think that we could articulate this in a ROI-based formula, people will listen, and they usually won't have a better idea, and they're very often apt to buy into it. And sometimes there's debate, like, should we define something like this or like that? And you have to be really thoughtful about how things are defined, and test, like, what is the conversion from stage to stage, for example. But I think allowing others to frame up the discussion, doesn't allow you to set yourself up for success. And so just the definitional nature of how you're going to do it, it does vary a little bit by industry. The one thing I really am a fan of, like the demand waterfall, but the one thing that I've noticed is that every company I've implemented it in has had to customize it a little bit differently for their business. The definitions and how the sales teams and the marketing teams are structured. And so I think that there's a lot of room for that. And that's, I guess, my main point is that if you can take an active role in that and drive consensus around it, you set yourself up for success in a very meaningful way.
So this is a great place for us to take a quick break, because I want to dive into this. I remember in that round table, you actually describe what, sort of some valuations, whether it was revenue per customer or so forth. And so a way of looking at, things in order to get a budget. So, we're going to take a quick break, and we've got a lot more to dive into. So stay tuned.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Eric Eden, and we're talking about demand generation and how a CMO can take control of the process of marketing. And if a salesperson says your leads are crappy, not accept that at face value, but actually dive in there. So let's talk about this, measurement, and so let's take a specific case. You can do CVent or you can do Receipt Bank, but walk us through sort of some of the things that we're talking about here, whether it is, lifetime value, or how did you sort of go about getting budget and getting more budget?
Exactly. So I think that the key thing to start with in doing the formula is, what does it mean, to live the dream? What does success look like? And if a lot of cases, I would start by talking to the team in finance, and particularly a lot of companies have a financial planning analysis function, FP&A, and the people in that function are often very helpful. In software companies, to use this as an example, when you're selling a software license that can be on an annual basis, and then you would have an expectation that if you sign up a customer, they could probably be a customer for X number of years. So a common way to, in software as a service companies, pretty well-known customer acquisition cost formula is that the fully loaded cost of sales and marketing, including program costs and headcount for sales and marketing, is 1 year of the contract value or less would be acceptable to a lot of executives or leaders, because they know that if they win a customer, the customer might be a customer for 4 or 5 years, and there has to be some upfront investment to win them. So let's just take an example that if you're signing a customer that is worth $10,000 a year and you sign them to an initial 3-year contract, and you project that customer will have a lifetime contract of at least 5 years, just because it'll be hard for them to move after the 3rd year to another software solution. You can say the lifetime value of this customer is $50,000, and we're okay with, the FP&A function would say, we're okay with if you could spend $10,000 in sales and marketing between the cost of the salesperson, including their commission and their salary, and the cost of the marketing team and their salaries, and all the third-party program costs. You could spend $10,000 out of that $50,000. Okay, then you have a number to work with, and it's a little complicated, because how do you, on a campaign basis, figure out, okay, what is people cost and what is program cost? But generally what you can get to is you can say, okay, what percentage of that $10,000 that we can spend could we put towards programs and what goes towards people? So in some cases, it's been like, okay, half of that amount can go towards the third-party program costs. Aha. Then you have a number of $5,000. So if you run a campaign and you spend $50,000, you know that you need to win 10 customers at $5,000 and apply $5,000 of their contract towards that cost in a third party. So if the third party cost is $50,000, you would need to win 10 customers in order to hit the CAC formula, the customer acquisition costs. And if you can come up with some formula like that, software companies and other companies might have different, but the main insight is that get an agreement on, what does success look like? If we hit certain metrics, what would those metrics be? And then back out to what was a people cost and what's a program cost. Then you have the dollars you can work with. And optimally, what you do is you get people to agree to, okay, well, let's test this with X number of dollars. And if we can prove it, will you give us more? Okay. And then you prove it. And then they unlock more dollars for you. And then you keep proving it. And so understanding that right formula, getting agreement between sales, marketing, finance, the CEO, and then testing it and proving it is really how you unlock the budget.
And that's such an important point, and yet I know that very few CMOs actually have that conversation, where they can, because if you have that conversation, if you have that math, then we're suddenly, marketing's not a cost, it's an investment, right? If I put $5,000 down or $50,000 down, I'm going to generate 10 customers that we need, right? Okay. So if I put $500,000 down, it's not always, 1-to-1, but then, and you can keep going as long as the formula works, right? And you can keep, investing. So you, in theory, have been applying this to your current job. Has it resulted in being able to get more budget?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting because the investors in Receipt Bank were the same private equity firm who invested in CMOs. And so they operate by the same formula, and the majority of the amount of the money that they invested is going towards sales and marketing, because they believe that logos or new customers can be acquired at a cost. And it's just a matter of discussion of, the formula and how much can it be optimized. And so, it is working, for us, and we're continuing to try to optimize it as further, because the better you can get it, the more that can be invested and the better the return is. So I think a lot of it comes down to, where the rubber meets the road is, and every time you're running a program, how efficient can you be? How well can you negotiate each vendor or co-marketing contract? Because every dollar counts. If you get it for 30% lower, you can be 30% closer to achieving your result. And so I think that it just comes down to execution once you have the formula agreed.
Okay. So I think we're going to take another break here because I want to go back to, so we now have established that this is how you get a budget and this is how you get more budget by saying what the return will be for those dollars, testing and proving it. And once you prove it, keep going and becoming more efficient. I want to go back to what this tech stack looks like in order to make sure that you have the data and how you can when can you make the decision to add another layer? So, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Drew. I was at a conference the other day and somebody looked at my saw lapel pen and said, "What's up with that?" And I said, "Well, what's the one thing that marketing has always had to do? Forget digital, forget all this stuff. What is the one marketing imperative?" And he looked at me and went, "Cut through." And I went, "Yes, ding, 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 ding. That's right. Cut through. That is what marketing must do." And it's not just cutting through the clutter, although that's really important because if your marketing doesn't cut through the clutter, it's like the proverbial tree in the forest that falls and nobody hears it. But it's also cutting through the crap and the processes that inhibit innovation. We've been working a lot lately with some CMOs to help them cut through the crap and get at the essence of what is their big idea. And how can they make a case to expand that idea across their business? That, to me, is cutting through.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is still Eric Eden, who is the CMO of Receipt Bank and truly an expert on creating marketing programs that drive demand generation. So, Eric, we've been talking. We've got a budget now, and the brand is you're growing and achieving your all your various metrics. Talk about the tech stack. What do you have to have, and then what are the things that you build on top of it?
So the way I like to describe this is that if you're building a sales and marketing machine for a company and you want that to generate growth, it's really for most companies that they want to grow in a smart way. And so in order to get to that smart growth, you can't just start launching great campaigns because what then happens is that you can run the best campaign in the world, but it's like running a marathon and tripping right before the finish line because you don't have the right way to get the leads to the sales team, or it's delayed getting to the sales team, or the data is wrong when it gets to the sales team in the systems, for example. So it's about laying foundations. So there's a couple aspects to the foundations. The first foundational block is the systems themselves. And you have to have systems there because you can't just do everything manually because that doesn't really scale. And so probably the most common system that people go for first is a CRM system, a Salesforce or a Microsoft CRM or something along those lines. And usually that ends up being the system of record or where you should go to get the one true version of what's happening. Because if you start just putting in place a lot of systems, they all have their own reporting, and then how do you know which system to believe the reporting out of? So you have to have a system of record that is one view of the truth. And that's generally usually the CRM system, and all the other marketing systems that you launch are in orbit around that CRM system. Because typically the CRM system is where opportunities are tracked by the sales team, the sales are recorded as one, and in often cases that's where the information flows out to billing and contracts. So if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to first architect the CRM system correctly and then start layering on top of it, the other systems, which is often trickier than it appears at first glance.
Okay. So you have a couple of tricks when it comes to working with Salesforce. I mean, one that I've heard a lot of is, when you tell the salespeople they don't get paid unless the leads are in Salesforce. That's an old one, but you did a couple of things I remember at Cvent that helped the sales guys not have to spend so much time in Salesforce, but help them get that information in there.
Yeah. So I think that you have to develop a culture of if it's not in Salesforce or in the CRM system, it didn't happen. And whether that's via carrot or stick, you have to create that culture. One of the things that we did do at Cvent is that we had offshore teams that did data entry for the sales teams because why would we pay sales executives a lot of money to do data entry half the day? And a lot of the sales team's perspective on the CRM system is, why should I have to sit here and type in all these hundreds of things into Salesforce every day? So we basically had people offshore do the data entry. So they did as little data entry as we could architect. Like the leads were loaded for them. They never typed anyone's contact information to the system.
So that's wonderful thing. You tried that where? What's that?
Yeah. So that's what we try to do is we try to really limit what they actually had to type in. And then we tried to optimize, okay, how can we make their workflow such that they can do things very quickly? Like how can they update 20 opportunities in one screen instead of having to click into 20 individual opportunities back, click in, update it, click back, click in the next one. That's where, adoption and systems really falls apart. So if we want them to maintain their pipeline and opportunities, we came up with almost like what looked like an Excel grid within Salesforce that they could just update the 3 key fields of what's the potential close date, what's the potential sales value, and what's the probability of close for all of their open deals, and then click save once.
Oh, that's awesome.
And when you think about ways to do things like that, instead of making it problematic or time consuming for the sales reps to do things, like they were saying, it takes me 10 minutes to create an opportunity. So we figured out a way that they could create an opportunity in 30 seconds and add more information later. And so these things seem like small things, but if you start getting 100, 200, 400 people on a Salesforce, if you want to get adoption, you have to solve those sorts of things. So part of it could be having someone, offshore people, do the data entry and marketing for them so they don't ever type in any lead information. Part of it is workflow things and making their workflows easier. Part of it is just making it so that when they come in for the day, everything they need to do is organized for them. And if people are out sick, the managers can reassign their work to other people, for example. So I would say a lot of it's workflow, but also it's just architecting in such a way of you're not just dumping a burden onto salespeople of spending half their day typing things in. You hire salespeople to sell, not to do data entry, right?
Yeah, really respecting their talents and not forcing them to do stuff they're not good at and are a waste of their time. It's really smart management. So, okay, we've got Salesforce, all the data is in there, the leads are coming in. What's sort of the next text thing that we add on? Do we jump to marketing automation at this point?
Yeah, so I think the key question is how does marketing pass the baton to the sales team? And usually it is from email campaigns. The various types of email campaigns could be webinars, it could be in-person events, it could be content campaigns. But generally those types of campaigns come from a marketing automation system. And I would say that is probably the second most popular layer of the marketing technology stack. And I would say, the big challenge with the first two layers is these are very expensive layers. And generally it takes a considerable amount of time to implement both of these systems and get them to work together. And so I think a key for marketing executives working with the sales leadership and the rest of the management team is really to be realistic in the project timelines and costs. So the old IT adage was for every dollar in license, it costs $3 in staff time to implement it. And I found that that's at least the case, with these types of systems, because even don't be fooled when it's called marketing automation. You need a team who is there to configure it, to run it, to manage it. And in some cases, it's actually more work, because the heart of marketing automation is really like, instead of just sending people emails one at a time, you're going to plan out, an entire 6 months of the emails they're going to get. But guess what? In order to do that, you have to come up with the 6 months of content and get everyone to understand what that is. So that's a lot more work than sending out one email. And, just then the mechanics of making the systems work together. And so, for example, some vendors have said, oh, you can implement a marketing automation system in 90 days. But my experience is it's more like 6 months. It depends on what your requirements are, but it's not simple. It's definitely not 30 days. And so, I think this is where, if you think about a sales and marketing organization, and if a project is going to take 6 months, that's a lot of time for people to be waiting for things to come online. And so setting the correct expectations, planning things out, and really knowing how long things will take will guide you in what teams to hire, because, unfortunately, they don't teach people marketing automation in college. So if you're hiring young people on your team, then you have to send those people to training, and it takes them time to learn the systems. And you have to add that to, just configuring the system. There's things you can do, like you can hire firms that, if you have a more junior team, for example, that can come in, evaluate your business, and they can help you implement Salesforce, and they can help you implement a marketing automation system because they've done it at 200 companies before. So you could do that, and that does really help, but there's also a cost to that. So it's back to the $3 for every dollar in license. So not only are the systems expensive, but it's also expensive one way or the other in manpower to set them up and to manage them. And so, planning it out in terms of the expectations and the costs up front is very important, because executive teams tend to get frustrated when, if you think about putting in place a CRM system and then a marketing automation system, that's very easily a 2 to 3 year journey. Yeah. And if you don't get up to people like that, 6 months in, people are really frustrated. They're like, why aren't we living the dream? And so you have to kind of be thoughtful when you're laying that out for them, and you're looking at what these systems cost and what the ROI is in terms of setting the expectations and realistically what it costs. Like, if you don't include what it costs to set them up, you'll be 3x over budget. And that's where a lot of the grinding of the gears comes in, because people spent the money on the license and they didn't really realize what it costs to implement it. They're like, wait, but the vendor told us we could just buy this and we could log in right away. Well, that's true, but nothing is configured, nothing is set up, nothing is integrated. And so if you don't really plan it out, you can be in a situation where you're managing a major failed project that costs the company a lot of money.
And that's not usually a good formula for success or tenure. So as I'm thinking about this, and I think about, we talked about Salesforce and then adding a marketing automation a system. One question would be, well, why not just use Salesforce's marketing automation tool? Like, isn't it Pardot or something? And then you're basically buying the same thing from one company. Doesn't that simplify one's life? Why doesn't that happen more? Because I know that Eloqua and Marketo have such strong presence out there in marketing automation.
Actually, I think in the last 20 years, I've implemented Eloqua, HubSpot, Pardot, and Marketo. I've implemented most of the large ones, and it's very similar. They all work in very similar ways, and the cost is actually very similar. The level of effort to set it up, configure it, and administrate it is very similar. Because Salesforce essentially bought Pardot, and it was part of a company that they bought. So it wasn't like designed as part of Salesforce initially.
Right.
So it's very similar to like a Marketo or a HubSpot. And So I think it's just something that when you're putting these systems in place, if they're going to be foundational to all of the things that you're doing, you have to really be thoughtful about how they are implemented, architected, and you really need someone on the team who is good at managing technology systems and integrating them together. So most marketing teams, I think, in the B2B space, if they're going to be successful, they kind of need their own marketing CTO. And I've been lucky that the companies I've had, I've been able to get someone to be in that role, because it really is a full-time job just to figure out how all these systems work together, to keep them working together, to troubleshoot problems with the integrations, to keep, data clean in the systems. And if you don't do that, like a lot of the marketing automation companies charge based on the number of the contacts or the data in the system. And if you don't keep your system clean with the data, your cost of those systems can literally double.
I think what we should do here is I'm going to wrap up this as part one of a 2-part episode, because there's just way too many more questions that I have that have come up. In this episode, we've covered a lot of ground in terms of how do you get a budget. One is getting agreed upon metrics up front, getting agreement that if we do hit these numbers, and here's the lifetime value of our customers, and therefore if we acquire a customer for this amount, if we do this, we'll get more investment. So you're setting yourself up for success. Secondly, we talked a lot about the systems that you need, the fundamental systems. It all starts with a CRM system, because you have to have the database that from which everything else sort of orbits. And we talked a lot about that. So we're going to pause here. I want to thank you again for listening and being a listener to Renegade Thinkers Unite. There's a lot more to come in the next episode, but in the meantime, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.